and a lot of news on DJI. And today is no different because we're talking about the Clone Wars, the coming wave of alternative DJI companies coming out to be sold in the US, kind of ahead of the curve for a possible DJI ban. We hope it doesn't happen because DJI makes great drones, and it would be a shame if we couldn't get them any longer in the US. But to stay ahead of the curve and get you thinking about DJI alternative drone company brands, we're going to go over some of the ones that we love the most in this video, and you can get a comparison of each in this video together and the price compared to something like a DJI Mini 4, because DJI has literally 5 months to get straight with the federal government in the US before they get banned by default or they get found guilty or not guilty by the federal assessments. If you like our videos, please do subscribe, comment, and...
Why am I seeing a video that's a year old?
In every city and every state in this country, there's a camera just like that in your neighborhood on your city streets. And it's recording everywhere you go when you leave your home. It's recording you when you take your children to school, when you go to work, when you go to the doctor's office. It's even recording your plates when you're going to the places that you don't want other people to know about. Every single trip timestamped and stored in a searchable database. A database of suspects. A database that they are actively using to find criminals. Now, you aren't a criminal, but you are now in a database and you're being treated like a criminal. Any cop in the country can search that database. They don't need a warrant and they don't need a judge. They can just pull up your plate and see the entire map of your life. Now they'll tell you that they're only using it to solve crimes. But the person running your plate isn't always chasing a car thief. Sometimes they're abusing that citywide mass surveillance system for illegal and illicit purposes, to hunt down ex-girlfriends and ex-husbands. And there is actually a website right now where you can go to check if your own plate is already sitting in one of these logs. Now I'll show you where you can find that information and even how you can help contribute to help stop this insane government overreach.
We are using the tool to try to solve felonies and gross misdemeanors, and a heavy focus on assaults, murders on...
Well, the truth is, we don't believe you, because when flock cameras first came to Washington State and to the Valley, they were for felony crimes only. And since then, you've lowered it to gross misdemeanors. So we have to assume what's coming next. You surveil us by telling us that we have no reasonable expectation of privacy when we're in public. But now you've made it illegal for us to request the data from you by telling us that information, the license plates, everything from that flock camera is private now. Now flock cameras, like this one, well, not like this one exactly. This is a 3D printed one, but this is what they look like if you're on the road and you're looking for it. Okay, I think you get it. You understand exactly how serious this is. But what is a flock camera? And others like it? Well, they're basically a network of cameras that are taking still shots of your license plate, the make and model of your car, location information, any identifiable information that might make a fingerprint of your car, like dents, dings, roof racks, anything like that. And they're putting that into a database. Most of them are solar powered, and they upload immediately to the cloud over cellular. So within moments, seconds of tagging your vehicle, it's in a database that is instantly searchable by private organizations or law enforcement around the world. You find them commonly in cities, municipalities, things like that. But also, don't forget, Home Depot, Lowe's, Walmart, they can have them as well. This is a private company, and it allows anyone to have a contract and anyone to search. Now, flock cameras, they log every single car that passes. No crime required, no suspicion needed. They're in over 5,000 plus communities across the United States, and the network is capturing more than 20 billion license plate reads a month. 20 billion. Now, one login and one search, up to 97,000 cameras and 6,800 networks, all at once. A police chief in Norfolk, Virginia, actually bragged about building a curtain of technology so that you can't drive any real distance without hitting one. Now down here in the valley, the police won't publicly list out where they're placing these flock cameras. And the reason they gave us was that they didn't want people to change their driving habits.
Well, of course we would. Nobody wants to be recorded like this. The pitch is always the same. This catches car thieves. This finds missing children. But nobody pitches you on what happens when the login belongs to somebody who isn't really looking for either of those things. The entire system is sold on the premise that the people holding the login credentials to this mass surveillance network won't abuse them. Tell that to the people in Milwaukee when an officer used his access to track a woman he was dating and her ex more than 170 times over 2 months. Now he resigned hours conveniently just before his court date. The department needed someone to then look into it, so they chose a detective, 22 years on the force. That detective ran the audit. Unbelievably, buried in the audit was his own name. He had tracked a completely different woman's plate 17 times, logging the reason as test and training. This detective even planted a physical GPS tracker under her car, which she ended up finding later. The detective they sent to catch the abuse was actually committing crimes himself. In Idaho, a sheriff ran his own wife's plate over 700 times in 3 months. Every search, again, logged as test. And then conveniently, he retired clean. In Kansas, a police chief tracked his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend over 200 times before he, conveniently, stepped down. And again, in Georgia, just this last month, 5 officers in one department were fired and then arrested, and one of them is facing 11 separate counts. The Institute for Justice has counted at least 21 of these cases since 2024, and of course, this will just be what's reported. The rest of it, I promise you, is covered up. And stick around, because I'm going to show you how states are preparing to hide this information from you instead of fixing the problem. Now, you would think that this is just a simple discipline problem. You fire the bad ones and you move on. But this goes past individual officers with bad intentions. This is about the system itself being weaponized. Now, in my home state, instead of protecting you and I from law enforcement abuse, they went the opposite direction. They built a new system to hide the corruption. Washington just passed the Driver Privacy Act this March. Now, on paper, it sounds like a win with shorter data retention and locking out some of the federal agencies. But read past that headline. Buried inside the bill is a provision that completely exempts license plate reader data from public records requests. You can no longer FOIA this information to see who got searched or why the officer ran the plate. The exact public audit trail that exposed every single abuse case that I just told you is now legally shielded from you. While they were sealing that door, they walked right through another one. The original draft of the bill only allowed cops to run searches for felonies. By the time it passed, cities had lobbied to water it down to now include gross misdemeanors, creating a much lower bar and a massive expansion of that surveillance net. Lawmakers took away your ability to see who is tracking you while giving police a wider net to track more people. They then had the nerve to call it the Driver Privacy Act. That is exactly what it looks like when the agencies running the surveillance get to write the rules on oversight. Now go ahead, do a Google search on any recent legislation for your country and your state, and let me know in the comments how they're handling it. So, what about security on these things? Must be pretty bulletproof, right? Well, it gets worse, because at least 35 of these law enforcement accounts have already had their passwords stolen by hackers. The company doesn't even require two-factor login as of this video. The bare minimum security that even your bank makes you have isn't even required to access a database of every place that every person has been. Okay, fine. There's a whole bunch of you that will say that you're okay with all of this because at least it's catching real criminals. But is it? Oak Park, Illinois runs one of the only public audits of its own system in the entire country. Their own oversight board came to a brutal conclusion that there's no evidence that these cameras have meaningfully solved a single local crime since 2022. And about a third of the stops that these cameras trigger end with the driver being released on the spot because of a wrong plate and it being the wrong car. In Arkansas, a couple was pulled over at gunpoint, cuffed on the pavement while their 6-week-old child was left alone in the car seat. The reason? A camera misread their plate. The officer's own words afterward, hey, I'm not going to say that the technology is completely perfect because, you know, that's just it. It's modern technology. That was the apology. Blaming it on technology and just a shrug for violating rights. All right, this is what I told you at the top of the video. There is a website called haveibeenflocked.com, and I'll have that linked in the description and here on the screen probably. Now, you cannot access the live cameras to track people yourself, but police departments are required by law to keep logs of every search that they run. Now, when citizens file FOIA requests for those audit logs, they have been handing it over to the Independent Privacy Advocate website. You type in your own plate and it will show you whether your car has been pulled up in any one of these searches. It shows you who searched for it, when they searched it, and what the reason is that they gave. This is public data that already exists about you, and until this tool was built, most people had no way to even know how to ask for it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, states like mine are taking this to the extreme and just making FOIA requests illegal. Now, they're going to tell you that the information is public and that you have no right to privacy. But when you ask for the information now that they have on you, they're going to tell you that's private and you don't have a right to that data. Now, because one of the ways to fight back is filing FOIA requests and getting that public information on you, Flock and law enforcement agencies are colluding. They're now working together so that when you request that information, you're now basically getting obfuscated junk. You're getting scrambled results, things that make everything that you receive unidentifiable, making the data ultimately useless. This isn't good. Now, if you're interested in contributing to the website, follow the instructions that they have on how you can file a FOIA request with your local police and sheriff's department to request that flock data. Now, if you aren't sure if you have flock cameras in your town, and I'm pretty sure you do, you can go over to maps.dflock.org, and I'll throw that up on the screen right now. And it's a very simple interface that allows you to just take a look at a map, zoom in, and look at the cameras that are available. And they look like this, well, kind of like this. A couple of different shapes, but if you see something like this with a solar panel above it, that's a flock camera.
Now, because our town doesn't list out where you can find these cameras, all it took for us was to just do a little drive around the valley, and we were shocked at how many there are. There's this one here, and just a quarter of a mile down the road, there's one on the opposite side. Now, I'll have links in the description where you can search up your town and your city, and you can find cameras and also report cameras that you find. I think you're going to be shocked at how many there are.
This isn't all bad news. There's some positives here. Dozens of municipalities across the nation are canceling flock contracts for various reasons. Some because of fraud, some because they are protecting the rights of citizens, and others because they are protecting the rights of non-citizens. Whatever the reason, canceling flock contracts is the right thing to do. Now, here are a few of those examples. Denver, Austin, and Eugene, Oregon already canceled their flock contracts. They looked at the reality of mass surveillance and forced the cameras out of their cities. Mountain View, California, it shut off all 30 cameras after finding 250 plus unapproved agencies had run nearly 600,000 searches over 12 months, including the ATF, Air Force, and a GSA Inspector General that had access that nobody signed off on. Santa Cruz, California, they canceled theirs after confirming out-of-state agencies and ICE had accessed local data. Now, Denver, Colorado, they dropped 111 flock cameras for a smaller Axon network after the city auditor refused to countersign the contract over some type of sharing and privacy risk. Dayton, Ohio, covered all 72 cameras in trash bags after an audit found 7,100 plus searches for immigration enforcement explicitly barred under the city's own policy. And there are so many more. In fact, the list is so big, it's got to be its own entire video's worth of content on those cancellations. Every single time one of these cameras goes up, The cell is exactly the same. They tell you it's about protecting you from the bad guys. They tell you it's not about you. Go check your plate. Then go to your city council and ask how many of these cameras are already up and who has the login. Then demand that they take them down. To get your hands on this hands-free 2 battery backpack from Blue Eddy, you're going to want to head over to our community forum, to the giveaways channel, and that's at community.loyalmoses.com, and I'll have links in the description. Now, there's also extra ways to get extra entries, like following me on X, following me on Twitch, and subscribing to our YouTube channel, and other things like that. So make sure you do it all, and good luck. Now, there's also extra ways to get extra entries, like, and other things like that. So make sure you do it all, and good luck. I'm about to share with you why every single CNC machine, 3D printer, laser cutter, lathe sold in the United States must have blueprint blocking technology and connect to the cloud. So we're going to be taking a look at prosecutors against gun violence, and it's a blog post that they just recently put out, and it details the plan for them to take their New York, California, and Washington 3D printing CNC ban legislation nationally and globally. And this is this blog post that they put out, along with a letter that they ended up sending to like Bamboo Lab, Creality, Flash Forge. 3D printer and filament companies are not here to help us in this fight, at least not the foreign ones. Now, this is a California senator stating that no major manufacturers are stepping up to actually fight.
I just want to say a couple things. One is, as you will note in the system and in the analysis, the major 3D companies, printing companies are not opposed to this.
Now, they may have put their name on a meaningless petition, but they're not actively fighting this legislation. Do you honestly believe that Bamboo Lab, Creality, Flashforge, Polymaker, Sunlu, eSun, that they're going to come and defend the US Constitution? No, they just sell products. So for months, I've been making content on this topic, trying to raise the alarm, to let people know that you need to fight. And I received a phone call from our sponsor, Polymaker, well, ex-sponsor. And in so many words, they told me that they didn't appreciate the type of content that I was making, which is why I ended up dumping them. I didn't sign the new contract. And why you shouldn't rely on a Chinese company to fight American battles. Prosecutors Against Gun Violence calls on 3D printer companies to prevent at-home gun manufacturing. 20 prosecutors from across the U.S. penned a letter to major companies. This is what I've been talking about for a really long time. This isn't just isolated incidents of states going after 3D printing and manufacturing. And it was humorous to me, I think, some of my videos over the last 6 months talking about how this was a coordinated effort. I literally had YouTube comments filled with like, you're a conspiracy theorist. There's no coordinated effort. This is just a couple of states who are tired of ghost guns. Well, no, it's not. It is literally a coordinated effort that started back with 3D printers back in like 2017 or 2018. Prosecutors Against Gun Violence today sent a letter to major 3D printer companies, Bamboo Lab, Creality, and Flashforge, urging them to proactively implement printer-based solutions blocking the manufacturing of 3D printed firearms and parts. 20 members of PAGB, chaired by Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, of course it's Bragg, and Columbus City Attorney Zach Klein, signed a letter representing communities from California to North Carolina. The ability to manufacture 3D printed firearms at home is a very real and present national public safety threat. Why? Statistically, I think one person has been murdered in a nation of 350 million people. That is absolutely the opposite of a real and present national public safety threat. But notice that he says national. Quote, New York has taken monumental strides to combat the proliferation of 3D printed guns, but trafficking does not stop at state borders. Trafficking. You catch that? The states just can't deal with this themselves. That's because this isn't really about safety of their citizens. You can pass laws all day long that affect the safety of your citizens. Other states pass laws for the safety of their citizens. There are all sorts of things that get bought in other states and trafficked, or they cross state lines, and they don't go after those tools, those products. This is a full-on war on micromanufacturing and 3D printing, and they are using public safety, ghost guns, as the excuse. Now, this quote is continued from Alvin Bragg. Prosecutors from across the U.S. are calling on major 3D printer companies to protect our constituents, including their customers. Act swiftly to prevent machines from producing dangerous firearms. 3D printed firearms are a threat to public safety. Yeah, they keep saying it. As they allow individuals to bypass background checks and firearms to find their way into the hands of those otherwise prohibited from possessing them. If you're a criminal and you can't pass a background check, it's already against the law. This doesn't do anything. Criminals don't follow laws. It's that simple. It's just this is such a failed exercise. Prosecutors across the country are calling on 3D printer manufacturers to implement common sense solutions to keep our kids and community safe. Here we go. Common sense. You mean like common sense gun control? That's how it starts. Here we go. Now you have common sense 3D printer bans and controls. The letter, which builds on the work of Manhattan DA's office to engage directly with companies, comes in the wake of New York State's enactment of groundbreaking legislation requiring 3D printers sold in the state to be equipped with blocking technology. So if you're not familiar with that, they went ahead and put that into the budget bill in New York. So there was no way for the state to get school funding, road funding, anything, unless they approved this technology. Now, the technology itself means that every 3D printer, CNC machine, lathe, drill press, laser cutter, anything that takes a digital file and either adds or subtracts to create an object must have this blocking technology. The blocking technology is basically you go to cut or 3D print something and it has to check the state database first to find out if that object that you're about to create, if it's dangerous or not. So it puts a lot of very resource-intensive processes on those machines, which for the most part, they're not even capable of, which we probably will cover in a different video. It's likely going to 100% have to be cloud-based. So they're going to require these machines to authenticate and connect to a cloud. Now, I want you to pay attention to this. This is where it gets really interesting and where a lot of people said this was never going to happen. The coalition urges companies to take immediate proactive steps by, quote, adopting minimum safety standards consistent with New York's landmark legislation by equipping, ready? All 3D printers sold in the United States with blocking technology to prevent the unlicensed and illegal production of firearms and firearm parts. I flat freaking told you. So all you mouth breathers out there who are saying, it doesn't matter, I don't care, it has nothing to do with my state, it's just Washington, it's just New York, it's just California, well, now it's coming to your backyard. They're not happy with it inside their state. Right there. All 3D printers sold in the United States with blocking technology to prevent the unlicensed and illegal production of firearms and firearm parts. All. That means the letter that they're sending to Bamboo and Creality and Flashforge and others, they're not just asking for one machine for their states or firmware just for their states. No, they're going to demand it everywhere. And if those companies don't comply, they will be punished by those states. I told you. And it's not just the US. They're not going to make a special US version of this hardware and software. Washington, New York, and California, they will dictate what 3D printing is for the rest of the world. So you should start getting louder. Start sharing this video and every other video with everyone that you know. Don't let them do this to us. It is imperative that your company takes swift action towards the implementation of these common sense safeguards. There's that word common sense again. To this end, we respectfully request a meeting with representatives from your company and members of our respective offices. We are committed to working with you to curb the creation of illegal ghost guns to keep our communities safe. And then I actually have a link to the document right here, which this one happens to be to Flashforge, and it's the full letter. I'll have the links in the description, so feel free to go click on it and read it. But this is absolutely terrifying. Terrifying for additive manufacturing, terrifying for subtractive manufacturing, because it's not just about 3D printers. Now, at the time of this video, so today is July 1st, this letter in the blog post went out on June 29th, so just a couple days ago. California just had their most recent committee hearing. It was a public safety committee. That's on California's AB 2047, which is their blocking technology bill in the state of California. And I know that people think that you can just go to these meetings and you can speak and you're going to change their minds and they're going to hear you and they're going to understand, and at least you're doing something. Well, to be honest with you, at least you're wasting your time. Those meetings, those hearings are designed to make you feel like you're doing something. They want you to feel like you're being heard. Anybody that was there, you saw it. Sometimes 30, 40, 50, maybe more people spoke at those committee hearings. They don't care what you say.
You're not allowed to speak unless a member asks you a question. We're not going to tolerate any outbursts. Please exercise decorum or I'll have to ask you to leave.
They have political aspirations. They have huge money backers that are supporting them. They don't care what you say. They nod their heads.
Thank you very much.
Say thank you for showing up,
Are
and then
you
they pass the
sure?
bill anyway.
AB 2047 Barricade Hand wishes to pass the
Because
amendment to
it
appropriations
could
agreement.
be
The only way to stop this is to
hard
make
to
those
tell
politicians
just
fear
by
that they're going to
looking
lose
in
their
the
seat, that they're going to lose their power. If you're at those meetings, walk up there, stand up, and tell them that you're going to vote them out, and that you're going to tell every one of your family and friends, your entire social circle, and you're going to spend from now till November or whenever the next election is, making sure that every single person that you know or come in contact with is going to vote against them. And when hundreds and thousands of people do that by email, by phone call, or showing up in person, that's what makes those people change their mind. That's what makes people look at every town's money and go, you know
Why
what?
would
Maybe I
guitars
don't want to do this.
still
Maybe I want to
sound
stay in office, keep my position. It's the only way it changes. If you want me to cover more of this, absolutely say something in the comments. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next one.
I had a Korean plywood squire that sounded amazing. All of the Les Paul specials.
Hey, buddy, how's it going? Hope you have a lovely day. Welcome to today's episode of How the CEO of Dragonfly Energy is about to get it. I'm your host, Lewis Rawson. I told him that he needs to drop this frivolous lawsuit that he made against the YouTube review that made unfair use of props. And one of the problems that I'm noticing among battery companies is they tend to have different things on their websites at different times, and it is something that's starting to really fucking piss me off. What I noticed about Deep Cycle Systems, another piece of company in Australia, decided to sue a good friend of mine, Stephen Fisher, because he published an honest review. This over here says March 25th, 2022, and when we scroll down over here, you'll notice that we have something different. The battery will be determined to be defective if it fails to deliver less than 80% of its rated capacity during the warranty period. And if I search for the number 70 in my browser, you'll notice that it never shows up. So over here, you can see that this is the policy. Policy last updated June 14th, 2021, no change in date. If I take a look over here, this is October 28th, 2022. We have the same thing, 80%, never mentioned 70. If we take a look over here, we have March 9th, 2023, still is 80. And then when we click over here, you'll notice that on November 7th, 2023, when we scroll down to the bottom of the website, you'll see that it still says policy last updated June 14th, 2021. You lying fucking scumbags. I fucking dare you to sue me for defamation. So many people whose battery capacity dropped to 79, 78, 77, 76, 75, 74% were not able to get warranty service. And many of these people did not have access to that archival website because many of us still live in a world that we believe is honest. We don't think that right after we buy the product that we have to come up with a fucking offline.
In the early 1980s, inside the R.L. Drake Company factory in Miamisburg, Ohio, the assembly lines quietly began to change. The company that had built the most revered amateur radio transceivers in America was pivoting to assemble commercial satellite television receivers. For 2 decades, a copper-plated Drake radio on a basement desk was the ultimate status symbol, a reliable passport to global frequencies. But now, the heavy mechanical tuning dials were being pushed aside by the realities of a shifting electronics market. The paradox is that Drake did not lose the amateur radio market because they built a flawed product. They built some of the most reliable receivers in the world. They were forced from the ham shack because the math of American manufacturing could no longer compete with a flood of mass-produced, solid-state Japanese imports. But the real story of Drake is not just the story of a factory pivoting to satellite dishes to survive. It is the story of how American precision engineering lost the radio dial, and what happens when the finest equipment in the room is simply no longer cheap enough to build. Every week, we tell the stories of the American radios, stations, and broadcast habits that once shaped how this country listened, and what happened when the market moved on. Subscribe if that history matters to you. The story begins not with nostalgia, but with a specific place in Dayton, Ohio, in 1943. The story begins not with nostalgia, but with a specific place in Dayton, Ohio, in 1943. Robert L. Drake, a skilled electrical engineer, did not set out to build a legendary radio receiver empire. He started the R.L. Drake Company during the height of the Second World War as an industrial manufacturer, focusing on specialized components rather than consumer electronics. But as the war ended and the 1950s began, a new cultural and technological conflict emerged in American neighborhoods, one that would force Drake to change direction. By the early 1950s, the television set was invading the American living room. Millions of households were buying heavy wooden consoles from RCA, Zenith, and Philco, gathering around glowing screens for evening broadcasts. But in many of those same neighborhoods, an amateur radio operator, a ham, was transmitting signals from a garage or basement. When a ham operator pressed a telegraph key or spoke into a microphone, their powerful radio frequency often bled into the neighborhood's television antennas. The television picture would distort, roll, or completely wash out in a storm of static. This was known as TVI, or television interference. It pitted the American radio hobbyist against the American television viewer. Robert L. Drake saw a mechanical problem with a mechanical solution. His factory began manufacturing low-pass filters, small, precisely engineered metal canisters that an amateur operator could install on their transmitter. The filter allowed the radio signal to pass through to the antenna, while trapping the stray frequencies that interfered with local televisions. It was a modest product, but it introduced the Drake name to the American ham radio community. It proved that the Ohio factory understood how to tame erratic radio frequencies. By the mid-1950s, the American amateur radio market was facing a much larger crisis of frequency. For decades, voice communication on the radio had relied on AM, amplitude modulation, a system that varies the strength of a signal to carry sound. AM was reliable, but it was incredibly inefficient. It took up a wide slice of the limited radio spectrum, and most of the transmitter's power was wasted on a steady background carrier wave, rather than the voice itself. A new technology called single sideband, or SSB, was threatening to replace AM SSB, a highly efficient broadcast method that strips away the carrier wave and one sideband, concentrating all the transmitter's power into a narrow, piercing slice of spectrum, was a revolution. It allowed a ham operator in the Midwest to punch a signal across the Atlantic Ocean using a fraction of the power required for AM. But SSB had a fatal flaw on the receiving end. Because the signal was stripped down to its barest components, the receiver had to do the heavy lifting of perfectly reconstructing the sound. If an operator tried to listen to an SSB transmission on a standard AM receiver, the voice sounded distorted, scrambled, and completely unintelligible, famously compared to the quacking of Donald Duck. To hear SSB clearly, a receiver had to be perfectly stable. If the radio's internal components changed temperature and drifted even a fraction of a kilohertz, the voice would instantly turn to noise. In the mid-1950s, most American hams were using heavy military surplus receivers left over from World War II, or massive consumer units that generated enormous amounts of heat. As the glass vacuum tubes warmed up, the metal components expanded. The radio would slowly drift off frequency. An operator in a chilly basement had to sit with their hand resting permanently on the tuning dial, making microscopic adjustments every few minutes just to keep a conversation going. The American ham market desperately needed a receiver that could lock onto an SSB signal and stay there. In 1957, the R.L. Drake Company answered that need. They relocated their operations to Miamisburg, Ohio, and released their first true amateur radio receiver, the Drake 1A. Priced at $299, a serious investment for a working-class hobbyist, roughly equivalent to a month's salary for many Americans at the time, the 1A did not look like a traditional radio. Most receivers of the era were wide, heavy metal boxes designed to sit flat on a desk. The Drake 1A was radically different. It was tall, narrow, and surprisingly deep, resembling a piece of industrial test equipment rather than a consumer product. Its black cabinet and vertical orientation immediately stood out in local electronics stores and in the black and white advertisements of QST magazine. The bizarre vertical shape was not a design gimmick, it was an engineering solution to the problem of heat. By stacking the chassis vertically, Drake's engineers allowed the heat from the vacuum tubes to rise naturally out of the top vents, keeping the critical tuning components at the bottom perfectly cool. Inside the cabinet, Drake established what would become its signature American radio moat. The chassis, the heavy metal frame that held the wiring and components, was heavily plated in copper. Copper plating was expensive and labor-intensive, but it provided superior electrical shielding and a massive common ground for the circuitry. It prevented the stray electrical noise that plagued cheaper radios. The result was a revelation. When an American ham operator brought a Drake 1A home, connected it to a wire antenna, and tuned into the 80-meter or 20-meter bands, the receiver simply did not drift. Once the tubes warmed up, the operator could tune in an SSB signal from halfway across the world, let go of the dial, and the voice would remain perfectly clear for hours. The 1A proved that R.L. Drake was no longer just a filter manufacturer. They had solved the most frustrating problem in amateur radio, earning immediate respect from reviewers, radio clubs, and hardcore operators who demanded absolute precision. The Ohio factory was suddenly recognized as a serious competitor to establish giants like Collins Radio and Hallicrafters. But that first success did not secure the empire. Releasing a single strange-looking receiver had proven they could master the technology, but to truly dominate the American ham shack, Drake would have to build the entire station. The vertical black cabinet of the Drake 1A had proven that the Ohio factory could tame the erratic drift of single sideband signals. But a single specialized receiver was not enough to sustain an electronics empire. To truly dominate the American amateur radio market, R.L. Drake needed to clear the desk entirely and rebuild how the operator interacted with the airwaves. In 1961, Drake released the 2B receiver. Returning to a more conventional, horizontal tabletop cabinet, the 2B offered a level of selectivity that stunned the amateur community. Selectivity, the ability of a radio to separate one specific station from a crowded field of nearby overlapping signals, was a matter of survival on the chaotic shortwave bands. On a busy Saturday night, the 40-meter band was a screaming wall of Morse code, teletype interference, and overlapping high-power voices. The Drake 2B allowed a listener to electronically slice a microscopic window into that noise, isolating a whisper from across the continent while completely blocking out a massive signal, broadcasting just a fraction of a kilohertz away. But the true breakthrough, the engineering leap that made Drake the undisputed king of the American radio desk, arrived in 1963 with the introduction of the TR3. Until the early 1960s, a serious American ham shack, the dedicated room, basement corner, or garage workbench where an operator kept their equipment, usually consisted of two enormous, heavy boxes. One was the transmitter, which generated the signal. The other was the receiver, which pulled signals from the air. Operating them meant managing two separate tuning dials, matching frequencies by hand, and generating a massive amount of heat from two separate banks of vacuum tubes. The Drake TR3 was a transceiver, a single integrated unit that combined both the transmitter and the receiver into one cabinet, sharing critical tuning circuits to save space, reduce weight, and lower manufacturing costs. The physical impact on the American radio desk was immediate. The TR3 was incredibly compact for its era, roughly the size of a large shoebox. Its sloping front panel was framed in dark gray, dominated by a large, illuminated analog tuning dial. The scale that physically displayed which frequency the radio was tuned to. It looked sleek, purposeful, and distinctly American. Priced at $550, a massive investment in 1963 representing nearly 2 months of wages for the average American worker, and requiring the purchase of a separate, heavy AC power supply that sat on the floor, the TR3 was not an impulse buy. It was a serious financial commitment made by doctors, engineers, truck drivers who saved for months, and Midwestern farmers who wanted a reliable line of communication to the outside world. What justified that price was a hidden piece of mechanical engineering that became Drake's ultimate American moat, the permeability-tuned oscillator, or PTO. In a standard radio, tuning was accomplished by turning a knob connected to a tuning capacitor, a component made of interlocking metal plates that changed the circuit's tuning to select one station from many. But standard capacitors suffered from mechanical backlash. The gears had a slight looseness. When a listener let go of the knob, the frequency would often shift just enough to lose an SSB signal. Drake's PTO discarded the traditional capacitor entirely, instead turning the main tuning knob physically pushed and pulled a powdered iron core in and out of a tightly wound coil of wire. This mechanism was enclosed in a heavy, sealed metal can to protect it from temperature changes and humidity. The result was an operational field that became legendary in the hobby. Picture an American ham operator sitting at a workbench in a chilly, uninsulated Illinois garage at 2 o'clock in the morning in 1964. Outside, snow is falling. Inside, the vacuum tubes of the TR3 cast a warm orange glow against the wall. The operator spins the main tuning dial. Because of the heavy internal flywheel, the knob glides with a buttery, weighted smoothness. There is zero mechanical backlash. With a subtle flick of the wrist, the operator stops exactly on a frequency, pulling a weak, wavering voice from a missionary stationed in South America, out of the atmospheric static. The operator lets go of the knob. The frequency holds absolute dead center. It does not drift. It does not waver. That mechanical reliability could not be easily reverse engineered or cheaply outsourced. It required the skilled labor of Miamisburg factory workers who hand-wired the point-to-point circuitry. It required the heavy-gauge steel cabinets manufactured in Ohio, and it relied heavily on Drake's signature copper-plated chassis. The thick layer of copper covering the metal framework of the radio provided a massive common ground for the electrical circuits, blocking the internal interference and stray electrical noise that plagued cheaper receivers. Distribution quickly scaled to meet the growing legend. A Drake TR3 could be ordered through massive mail order operations like the Allied Radio Catalog in Chicago, but it thrived in specialized Main Street electronics dealers. Showrooms like Amateur Electronic Supply, AES, in Milwaukee and Harrison Radio in New York City proudly placed the TR3 front and center. When a prospective buyer walked into an AES showroom and physically turned that PTO dial, the sale was often closed before the radio was even turned on. Soon, the Drake transceiver moved beyond the hobbyist basement. It was adopted by the Military Affiliate Radio System, or MARS, a network of civilian amateur operators who worked alongside the military. During the Vietnam War, a MARS operator sitting in an American living room could use a Drake TR3 to run phone patches, linking a high-frequency radio signal from Southeast Asia directly into the domestic telephone network, allowing a deployed soldier to speak to their family in real time. The American Radio Relay League utilized Drake equipment at W1AW, their national headquarters station in Connecticut, broadcasting daily bulletins that were trusted as gospel by operators nationwide. Drake had conquered the American desk by building a transceiver that was as reliable as a bank vault. But creating a singular masterpiece was only half the battle. Now the Miamisburg factory had to feed an exploding national demand without letting a single copper-plated chassis slip in quality. The success of the TR3 proved that Miamisburg could mass-produce precision, but the R.L. Drake Company was not satisfied with simply owning the transceiver market. To capture the absolute top tier of the American amateur radio operator base, Drake had to divide its engineering masterpiece into two separate matching halves. In 1965, Drake introduced the 4-line. While the updated TR4 transceiver perfected the all-in-one shoebox design, the true status symbol of the era became the Drake Twins, the R4 receiver and the T4X transmitter. Separating the transmitter and receiver might have seemed like a step backward after the triumph of the TR3, but it was a calculated engineering choice. By isolating the receiving circuits from the massive heat and voltage of the transmitting section, Drake achieved a level of selectivity and sensitivity that a single cabinet transceiver simply could not match. But the genius of the twins was that they did not have to operate independently. An operator could plug a heavy control cable between the two units, locking their permeability-tuned oscillators together. The operator could use the dial on the R4 to tune both units simultaneously, seamlessly transceiving on a single frequency with absolute stability. Setting up a complete Drake station on a basement desk required a staggering financial commitment. By the late 1960s, purchasing the R4 receiver, the T4X transmitter, the massive AC4 power supply, and the matching MS4 speaker cabinet cost an American operator well over $1,000. It was an investment comparable to a down payment on a new Chevrolet. But for the serious ham, the cost was justified the moment they turned the radios on. The physical presence of the Drake twins defined the aesthetic of the American ham shack for a generation. Two tall, narrow black metal cabinets sat side by side, their internal vacuum tubes generating a steady wave of heat. The front panels featured matching blue-green illuminated dials. Underneath the heavy steel covers lay the legendary copper-plated chassis, shielding the delicate point-to-point wiring from stray interference. Owning a Drake station in 1968 was a declaration of absolute technical seriousness. The equipment was no longer confined to local hobbyist garages. The R.L. Drake brand expanded into the most critical communication hubs in the country. If a buyer walked into the showroom of Henry Radio in Los Angeles, or stared at the display windows of electronic distributors in Washington, D.C., the Drake 4-line was positioned as the undisputed flagship of the store. The radios appeared in the glossy center spreads of CQ magazine and 73 magazine, marketed not as toys, but as professional-grade instruments. The radio on the desk was no longer just an electronic appliance, it was a frequency passport, stamped with the absolute guarantee of American engineering. Drake radios quickly became the backbone of emergency networks. During natural disasters, when telephone lines collapsed, American Red Cross communication trailers relied on Drake TR4 transceivers to coordinate relief efforts. The Military Affiliate Radio System, or MARS, deployed Drake equipment to run phone patches between soldiers in Vietnam and families in suburban America. When the famous hospital ship SS Hope sailed to developing nations, its radio room was outfitted with Drake twins to maintain a secure, static-free lifeline back to the United States. Even foreign embassies in Washington, D.C. quietly purchased Drake equipment for their communications rooms, knowing the Ohio-built radios would not drift off frequency during a critical transmission. This was the American cultural peak of amateur radio. The Cold War was raging, the space race was dominating the television screen, and a teenager in a suburban bedroom could buy a used Drake 2B, string a copper wire through a tree in the backyard, and listen to the world. The name Drake had become synonymous with global reach, but maintaining that reputation required a massive, unyielding manufacturing machine back in Ohio. By 1973, the R.L. Drake Company had evolved from a specialized filter manufacturer into a massive industrial engine. To meet exploding national demand, Drake introduced the legendary C-line, most notably the R4C receiver and the T4XC transmitter. This was a critical hybrid era. While earlier models relied entirely on vacuum tubes, the C-line began incorporating solid-state transistors for low-level audio and mixing circuits, while retaining powerful, reliable glass tubes for the final transmitting stages. It was a bridge between the glowing past and the digital future, manufactured entirely in the American Midwest. The production of a Drake radio was not a simple assembly line task. It was a heavy manufacturing process rooted in the traditions of the American Rust Belt. Inside the Miamisburg plant, the air smelled of heated rosin core solder and machine oil. Hundreds of American workers manned the lines. They stamped the heavy steel cabinets, operated the chemical vats to copper plate the internal chassis, and hand-wired the intricate point-to-point circuitry. Every permeability-tuned oscillator was assembled by hand, lubricated, and hermetically sealed. At the end of the line, highly trained technicians sat at alignment benches. Alignment, the meticulous process of adjusting a radio's internal components to perfectly match designated frequencies with test equipment, was performed manually on every single unit before it was boxed. Drake did not treat the American operator as a mere consumer. They treated them as a technical peer. every radio shipped with a comprehensive heavy paper manual that included complete schematic diagrams, the detailed electrical blueprints of the radio's inner workings. If a capacitor failed or a dial lamp burned out 5 years after purchase, the operator was expected to put the radio on a garage workbench, heat up a soldering iron, and fix it themselves using parts sourced from a local Radio Shack or neighborhood electronic supplier. This philosophy of total repairability built a fierce
If you play it
generational
at
brand
normal
loyalty.
speed,
This labor-intensive process produced tens of thousands
it's
of
a little
premium radios,
slow.
feeding a vast national retail network.
And
Drake equipment bypassed general appliance stores.
it's
and mail-order
technically
consumer
copyright.
catalogs. Instead, it anchored the shelves of dedicated amateur radio
So,
dealers. When a buyer walked into a massive
it makes
retailer
it
like
harder
Amazon
for
in
them to
California,
identify
or a
it
regional
as
Main Street shop like
copyright.
Electronic Specialty Company, the Drake display was the focal point of the showroom. The reputation of Miamisburg engineering eventually crossed oceans. Despite steep import tariffs and expensive shipping costs, foreign operators in Europe, South America, and even Japan ordered Drake twins through international distributors. In an era before globalized supply chains normalized cheap consumer electronics, the heavy American radio was viewed globally as the absolute gold standard for single sideband communication. If an operator wanted to be heard, they paid the premium for Ohio copper and steel. The American radio manufacturing ecosystem was thriving. Tube suppliers like RCA and General Electric shipped thousands of glass components to Miamisburg every month. Local Ohio metalworking shops provided the raw materials for the cabinets. The Dayton Hamvention, the largest annual gathering of amateur radio operators in the world, held just miles away from the Drake factory, became an annual victory lap for the brand. Tens of thousands of operators walked the fairgrounds, and the Drake booth was consistently the center of gravity. This was the pinnacle of American tube-era engineering, and it mattered deeply to the people who relied on it. Picture a county emergency coordinator sitting in a cramped, unheated garage in upstate New York during the brutal winter of 1974. A blizzard has knocked out the local telephone lines. The operator turns on a Drake TR-4C. The heavy AC-4 power supply hums on the floor, and the vacuum tubes cast a warm orange glow across the desk. The operator spins the PTO dial, cuts through the atmospheric static, and checks in with a state emergency net operating hundreds of miles away. The frequency does not drift in the cold. The voice remains crystal clear. For the American operator, the Drake radio on the desk was not merely an electronic appliance. It was a physical agreement between the listener and the manufacturer that the signal would not be lost. At its peak in the mid-1970s, the R.L. Drake Company commanded a dominant share of the premium amateur radio market, moving millions of dollars in equipment. They had successfully built an American radio moat, constructed of heavy copper, steel, and precise mechanical engineering. But that exact strength was about to become a fatal trap. The Miamisburg assembly lines were running perfectly, churning out the finest hybrid receivers in the world. But across the Pacific Ocean, a new generation of electronics manufacturers was preparing to prove that radios no longer needed heavy metal chassis, glowing glass tubes, or expensive American labor to find a signal. The machine in Ohio was still working flawlessly, but the economic math of the market around it was already beginning to break. The decline of the R.L. Drake Company's amateur radio empire did not begin with a dramatic factory closure or a sudden bankruptcy announcement. It began with a quiet, rational decision made at a retail counter. Picture the showroom of a major ham radio dealer, perhaps a regional shop like Amateur Electronic Supply in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1977. An American radio operator walks in to purchase a new station. For a decade, the natural choice would have been to walk straight to the Drake display, write a check, and carry home the heavy steel boxes of the C-line. But now, there is a new display on the floor. Sitting next to the heavy mechanical Drake radios are sleek, compact transceivers from Japanese manufacturers like Kenwood, Yaesu, and ICOM. The American buyer places his hand on the imported radio. There are no glass vacuum tubes inside requiring a massive power supply to heat up. It is completely solid state, relying entirely on cool, efficient transistors to process the signal. Instead of a mechanical dial with painted numbers that require careful visual alignment, the front panel features a glowing red digital readout, an electronic LED display that shows the exact operating frequency down to the precise tenth of a kilohertz. The customer looks at the price tag. The imported Japanese transceiver offers the digital display, a built-in power supply, and multiple bandwidth filters as standard features. All for hundreds of dollars, less than the base model of the Drake C-line. The American operator hesitates, considers the legacy of Ohio copper and steel, and then buys the imported radio. This was the first small crack in the foundation. It was the moment that two structural market forces, Force 1, the rising cost of American labor and heavy manufacturing, and Force 4, the relentless pressure of feature-rich imported electronics, collided on the American radio desk. The Japanese electronics industry had spent the 1970s optimizing global supply chains and heavily automating their printed circuit board assembly. They could design complex solid-state circuitry and manufacture it at a scale that drove the unit cost down drastically. In Miamisburg, Drake was still paying skilled American workers a living wage to hand-wire circuits inside heavy steel cabinets and chemically plate chassis in copper. The American manufacturing equation had broken. A Drake radio was undeniably durable, but it now cost significantly more to build than the mass market was willing to pay. Furthermore, the culture of the American ham shack was changing. For decades, the radio operator prided themselves on being a hands-on technician. If a Drake TR-4 failed, the owner pulled out a soldering iron, followed the heavy paper schematic, and replaced a standard resistor or vacuum tube. But the new solid-state imports were densely packed with proprietary microchips and delicate, machine-soldered circuit boards. They were not designed to be easily repaired on a garage workbench. The culture of the hobby was gradually shifting toward the appliance operator, a listener who simply wanted to turn the radio on, look at the digital numbers, and transmit without ever taking the cover off the cabinet. The imports catered perfectly to this new expectation of instant, maintenance-free convenience. R.L. Drake recognized the existential threat. They understood that the era of the glowing vacuum tube and the mechanical permeability-tuned oscillator was ending. To survive, they had to prove that an American factory could build a solid-state, digitally tuned transceiver that was vastly superior to the imports. In 1978, Drake released their technological masterpiece, the TR-7. The TR-7 was a radical departure from everything the company had built before. It was a completely solid-state transceiver, meaning it contained no vacuum tubes at all. It featured a digital frequency readout and continuous broadband coverage, allowing the operator to listen to any shortwave frequency between 1.5 and 30 megahertz without having to physically change tuning bands with a mechanical switch. It looked entirely different from the traditional Drake aesthetic, a wide, flat, modern black console that resembled the instrument panel of a commercial airliner rather than a hobbyist radio. From a purely engineering standpoint, the TR-7 was an absolute triumph. It possessed incredibly strong signal handling capabilities, meaning its receiver would not overload or distort when a powerful broadcast station was transmitting nearby. It proved that the engineers in Miamisburg could master the digital solid-state era just as completely as they had mastered the tube era. But the TR-7 fell immediately into the trap of Force 1. To build a solid-state transceiver of that caliber entirely in the United States required massive research, development, and high-end component costs. When the TR-7 hit the market, a fully equipped station, including the matching power supply, external speaker, and necessary filters, cost nearly $2,000. Adjusted for inflation, it was an astronomical sum for a hobbyist. The TR-7 did not reclaim the mass market from the Japanese imports. It priced itself out of it. It became a luxury item, purchased only by the wealthiest operators, government agencies, and commercial maritime fleets. The everyday American ham operator, the teenager saving up paper route money, the Midwestern farmer, the garage tinkerer, could no longer afford the name Drake on their desk. The radio worked flawlessly. The business model required to manufacture it in America was already beginning to fail. By 1981, the executives in Miamisburg faced a harsh mathematical reality. The TR-7 was an engineering marvel, but it proved that American labor and component costs had completely outpaced the amateur radio hobbyist's wallet. The R.L. Drake Company was trapped. If they cheapened their internal components, abandoning the heavy copper plating, the precise mechanical shielding, and the meticulous hand wiring, they would destroy the absolute trust their brand had built. If they maintained their Ohio manufacturing standards, they would simply run out of buyers. The company made a cold, calculated survival decision. They walked away from the American radio desk. The transition was quiet, but absolute. The Miamisburg assembly lines stopped ordering the heavy tuning dials, the analog meters, and the specialized transmitter tubes that had made the 4-line legendary. Instead, the factory retooled for a rapidly expanding, highly lucrative commercial industry. Satellite television receivers, or TVRO. Commercial broadcasters and early cable television providers needed rock-solid, drift-free equipment to pull microwave video signals down from orbit. The engineering leap from shortwave radio to satellite frequencies was difficult, but Drake already knew how to build the most stable receivers in the world. Shifting their expertise to commercial rack-mounted equipment saved the factory from bankruptcy. But for the American ham operator, the shift felt like an abrupt abandonment. The reality set in during the annual Dayton Hamvention in the early 1980s. For decades, the Drake booth had been the center of the American amateur radio universe, a place where crowds gathered to see the newest transceivers. Now operators walked the aisles and saw the premier American radio builder pushing commercial satellite dishes instead of a successor to the TR-7. On Main Street, the local electronics dealers cleared the premium Drake radio displays to make room for rows of glowing, plastic-cased Yaesu, ICOM, and Kenwood rigs. The American amateur radio market had effectively surrendered to the imported receiver. Then, a decade later, the Ohio factory offered one final, brilliant return to the consumer market. In 1991, Drake released the R8. It was a tabletop shortwave receiver designed not for the transmitting amateur operator, but for the serious global shortwave listener. It was a masterpiece of hybrid design, combining modern digital microprocessors with classic American receiver architecture. At roughly $1,000, it was an expensive investment, but it immediately captured the high-end market. Picture a suburban den in 1992 during the early days of the Gulf War. An American listener sits at a desk, the heavy black cabinet of the Drake R8, glowing with a red digital frequency display. By pressing a few tactile buttons, the listener perfectly isolates a fading, static-laced news broadcast from the BBC or Radio Moscow, using the radio's synchronous detector to lock onto the signal when cheaper radios would have lost it entirely. It felt like a triumphant return to the days of the 2B. The Ohio factory was proving, one last time, that they could build the best receiver in the room. But the R8
This
This
series
is
was a
such
swan song
AI
in this direction.
slop
The American listening market was fundamentally fracturing.
that the pictures don't even match what the hell they're talking about. It's ridiculous.
Welcome to Mr. Carlson's lab. Today we're going to restore a radio receiver from 1939. We're going to make it perform the way it did when it rolled off the factory line, which should be a lot of fun. In the end, we'll try it out and see how well it performs, so you get a really good idea of what this radio sounded like way back when. Let's get started. Here is our Westinghouse electrical restoration project for the day. As you can see, the cabinet itself is in original condition. It's never been refinished. It even has the original lettering and numbering. Zoom in so you can see this here. Now, really, it's quite common for people over time to drag their fingernails on fish and take all of this off. But somebody, or a bunch of people, however many hands or owners this has been through, has been very careful with this thing, and nothing has happened here. So that is definitely original, and this hasn't been put on there again.
Everything is AI bullshit.
So you can see, there's buttons, and it gives you your pre-tuned stations. Not bad. The tuning is nice and smooth. The switches feel pretty positive still.
Here we go. 1984. On 2x speed.
By the atomic rays of 1955, three great police states rose to divide the world: Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia. Atomic weapons were about, but not war itself. Only by maintaining the strain and tension of continual conflict could the ruling parties enforce absolute power. London, with its bomb-proof ministry, became capital of Airstrip 1, a province of Oceania. Stand by for an important announcement. The Ministry of Peace is happy to report that thanks to the vigilance of our Garrison defenders, no Eurasian rocket bomb was able to reach targets of very good. Continuing our target report. April 18, 1984. Nobody keeps a diary today. Because to do so will be punishable by death. I don't care anymore. I found it over by chance. And I'm going to step down when I cannot say aloud to anyone. I've seen that girl again. I'm sure she's probably. Perhaps they suspect me already. We interrupt the program for a important purpose. The downtown is going to Chico reform 2 minutes ago in 006 square and are waiting to test their guilt. Thank you for the rest of the time at one point. Long live Kid Bella! Because they're big size, that's the reason size. Take it out and don't have it.
Why you got to say so far away from the people? What's over there?
There's nothing about that, you know. It doesn't make a change. Nonsense, really nonsense. Winston has nothing to hide. I will. Amen? Yes. 674 regulation 6040. Out of my will always wear identification that is concerning public place. Express. Stop over again. All right, ready? Hello, Jim. Right. Okay. Over there. Didn't you recognize them? No. Jones and Rutherford. I thought they'd been liquidated. They ought to have been. Traitors. And then their trial. They confessed to being in the Rangers who had people last year, didn't they? That's why the war went back after 3 months after. They were able to disclose a lot of secret information. What are they doing at Liberty? DB granted them a pardon. Do you remember? We freed 25 prisoners in honor of the Mediterranean victory. Only DB could make a gesture like that. And as they hunting down with the military at last. Oh, yes. That's right here. That's right. There's much good about it. Two gins. Thanks. Maybe we shouldn't have stopped here. I get pretty uneasy when I hear people wrong. Healthy with what happened. Oh well. Long live DB. Long live DB. Anything wrong? No. Look at that girl as I understand. I just like her. I didn't know her. Yes, she works in the military truth and the fiction department. They turn out books for the sequel. But you haven't spoken to her? No, she's watching them. That needn't bother you. I mean, even if she's a member of the force police, she's got nothing to worry about. That's right. I think I'm true. Here's an important bulletin from the Ministry of Law. Tonight, his brother ordered the re-arrest of the arch traitors Jones and Rutherford. choice of treasure. Would you like another gin? No, thank you. What's the matter? Don't you feel well? I have a headache. I think I'll skip the community center tonight.
This week, the number of entrants in the Big Brother Victory Lottery has exceeded all previous records. And after deducting the usual percentage for the Mount Areas Fund, the proceeds to be distributed as prizes are the greatest since the inception of this lottery. Here are the results, as they were drawn by the hand of Big Brother himself from the millions of numbers. The first prize, higher than ever before, goes to 634921. The second prize, also larger than any previous week, goes to number 81346294.
If you need to get rid of stuff and you're preparing to move, you can't go there anymore. You'll just keep buying more stuff that you don't actually need.
Good evening. Good evening. Remember me? You're the gentleman that bought that old diary. Yes. I was just passing by. I looked in. I was wondering if you might have anything else in which I'd be interested. Do you mind if I look around? Not at all. What is this? Oh, that's coral, that is. That probably came from the Indian Ocean. Look. They used to embed it in glass like that. Oh, it must be 100 years old, or more. It's a beautiful thing. Yes, it is a beautiful thing. Not beauty as we understand it today, of course. It serves a useful purpose. But then, I'm an old man. How much is it? I could let you have it for 15 shillings. Have you changed? Yes. Thank you. Oh, there's another room upstairs. There's not much in it, just a few pieces. But you can't see it. Yes, I'd like to. I'll lead the way. We lived here until my wife died. I'm selling off the furniture little by little. There's no telescreen here. Of course not. It's a people's area. I know, but it seems strange. That's an interesting picture. It was a church. Do you know that word? Yes, there were 2 churches when I was a child. You must have been a grown man before I was born. You can remember what it was like in the days before the revolution. Yes? You can remember the oppression and the injustice and the poverty back in the 50s. Vaguely. I'm keeping you from your other customers. Yes. Well, you have a look around. Oh, excuse me. Good evening.
Good evening. I saw some things in the window and wanted to have a closer look.
Anything in particular?
No. You seem to have some interesting things.
I doubt if I have anything of interest for a young lady like yourself.
I see. Do you have many customers?
Alas, no. Yes, it's business just about finished.
Do many our party members come here?
Quite a bit. Ah, there you are. Your change. Thank you. Your paperweight. W.
Where do you work?
In the Ministry of Truth.
Which department?
The Records Department.
What is your business in the people's area?
I had a headache. I thought if I got a little air.
When do you leave work?
1,800 hours.
It's now 2200. Report tomorrow morning at 800 hours to court administration. W.
You took a rather long walk last night? Yes. Will it help your headache? I don't have one this morning. Have you been working too hard? I don't think so. Find your job at the Records Department, do exactly. No. What do you do, sir? I improvise history. That's an unfortunate way of putting it. What you actually do is to rectify speeches and wrongly reported incidents, isn't it? Yes. Shows how great the need is for establishing news speak as the official language as soon as possible. And the new dictionaries issued, there'll be less danger of calling things by their wrong names. Did you visit any of the shops in the people's area last night? No. Did you speak to anyone? No. Did you see any other member of the other party on your walk? No. You know the party disapproves of its members mixing with the people? Yes. Consider that unreasonable? No. 6748, you're a member of a privileged class, expected to accept restrictions as well as privileges. I had hoped we might be able to deal with this matter here in your own ministry. Your explanations are inadequate. This report will be forwarded to the Ministry of Love for further action. I think we can deal with it here. You're warned to pay strict attention to the regulations in the future. You can return to your department now. Directive number 424B.
6748, Miss W. Reference Big Brother only to November 12, 1983. Since the radio sense of handedness started here, it is impossible that Big Brother predicted this front would remain quiet. We write it as we show that through our magnificent espionage system, Big Brother has prior knowledge of all the enemy's plans.
Background is Gazette, November 12, 1983.
Signed 617S. The following men have been found guilty of treason and no longer exist. Thomas Downinger, Gordon Fenton, Harold Cho. Delete all reference to them from the Gazette of January 2nd, 1876.
Back numbers Gazette, January the 2nd, 826. What have you got there, Smith? This photograph was between the pages of the Gazette. What photograph? Oh, the lot of it. They confess to aiding the underground and being in Eurasia during this week. But yes, what are you talking about, Smith? I don't see any photograph. No photograph of the traitors Jones and Rutherford exists, does it? No. The system is not perfect. Sometimes there are errors.
Attention, convict. Take your places for the 2-minute tape.
Brothers, we are at war with the people of Eurasia. The vile and ruthless aggressors who have committed countless atrocities and who are guilty of every bestial crime a human being can commit. They raped our land, destroyed our factories, looted our homes, massacred our children, and raped our women. They have tortured and killed the wounded and prisoners, contriving lingering and horrible deaths for those who fall into their hands. While our gallant forces are engaged in a life and death struggle, we face on the home front an enemy who is far more dangerous. One of our own people, the arch-traitor Cannibal. This is the man, the leader of the underground, who betrayed our glorious revolution and who would betray Big Brother! A man whose agents
sabotage our glorious 9-year plan, who retards our progress and turns our military secrets to the enemy! It's time to tell you that Big Brother has betrayed you into fighting a war against Eurasia that you can never hope to win! He says the Eurasians are good and kind people. They do not want war. They want peace. He actually begs you to make peace with your brothers of Eurasia. In a few seconds, Eurasian prisoners will be passing through Victory Square. These are the evil men whose ruthless lust for power has threatened to destroy the civilized world. Men who prefer war, but already they are beginning to learn the mistake they have made as they encounter the mighty Oceania. Army is sweeping back the invading hordes of Eurasians. The figures of prisoners taken is the biggest since the war began. It's your chance, comrades, to let them hear the voice of Oceania. Here they are!
We're all right. There's no microphone here.
It takes a little while to realize you're not being overheard.
Oh, why? We can look at each other now and not be afraid.
We can say whatever we like to each other.
We can even touch each other. If we want to.
You know, I don't even know your name.
It's Julie. And yours is Winston.
How'd you know that?
I want to find something out I've ways. Took me ages to get that message to.
I thought you were spying on me when you came into that shop.
You thought I was a good party member. Pure in word and deed.
That's why I was afraid of you. You know, I hated you and I wanted to kill you. What Big Brother's done to us all. Made us hate and fear each other. How did you know I wasn't a good party member?
Something in your face. Somehow I knew you'd be against them. They'll be safe here once or twice again. Then we'll have to go somewhere else.
Eventually they'll find us out. I won't let you take that risk from me.
I'm not doing it for you, I'm doing it for myself. You keep the big rules. Safe to break the little ones.
You've been here before.
Yes? Does that shock you?
No.
They're afraid of love. Because love makes a world they can't control. And it's a world worth taking risks for, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. It's more than 2 weeks since we've been able to meet, except for a few moments in a crowd or near a telescreen. There must be a message in the usual place tonight. Hello, Selena. I didn't hear you coming.
You aren't meant to. We're trained as a spy to follow people silently.
Why were you following me?
We're told to follow anyone who behaves suspiciously.
What is suspicious about my behavior?
It's suspicious coming here.
I was working in my room on an article for Newsweek. A page blew out the window. I saw it fell down here and I came to try to find it.
I saw you pick up something.
I dropped my cigarettes, that's all. It's dark now. I'll have to look on my way to work tomorrow. Are you coming, Selena? Are you coming, Selena?
Yes, I'm coming.
It is now 22:30 hours. Power must be conserved for our victory effort. All lights will be extinguished.
Good night, comrades. Tomorrow, your work for the party must be better than today. Remember, even in your sleep, Big Brother is watching. Big Brother is watching. How long did I sleep?
I don't know.
Watching the movie 1984.
Like you leave.
I wonder if the dad come here again.
I think we're safe for another Sunday.
And then what do we do? I'm seeing each other every day without being able to speak. Passing the streets and pretending not to recognize each other.
I know. If only there was somewhere where you'd be afraid all the time. Where we could be together longer.
Julia, there is somewhere. That old shop. There's a room about it, but no one lives. And there's no telescreen. I believe I could rent that room.
The old man in the shop would have to know. Anytime he wanted, he could report us.
I don't think he would. I'd talk to him. He's only interested in his antiques. Renting the room would give him a little money so he wouldn't have to sell all his treasures. You saw him yourself.
Sooner or later, we'll have to trust him.
Today's guest is the most canceled man in comedy.
Slavery is a choice. If you're dealing with a population where they say competition is the only sin, you want people to choose that. Like, oh no, I'm nothing. I'm a speck of dust in an infinite vacuum spinning, and my ancestors are retarded monkeys.
The son of two professors in upstate New York, he started his career at the Renaissance fairs, taking tomatoes to the face for 9 hours a day.
I mean, statistically, Stephen Hawking living 50 years is 0%. So like the smartest man in the world that just decoded that there's no God has a brain disease so bad he can't speak, but yet he's watching midgets do math on Epstein Island, like, no.
Eventually, he became one of Adam Sandler's go-to comics, starring in countless movies, TV shows, and his own primetime sitcom until 2017, when he made one tweet that sparked the end of his career.
I could end billion-dollar propaganda campaigns with one sentence, and that really pissed people off.
In this episode, we'll explore the patterns he got canceled for noticing, expose the word magic he says powerful people use to keep you trapped, and question whether the truth actually set him free or instead cost him his sanity.
The spell behind all the spells is that you are not enough. Because if you know you're enough, if you know you're created properly, you're way less likely to be...
On mission. Welcome to the Jack No Podcast.
Yeah, I love when you reached out. I like your podcast. I was listening to one about you got me interested in travel agency.
Really?
Like that one with the travel agent, I'm like, that's pretty interesting, and I would never think that's interesting. Like, I like that pod a lot. I was like, rich people travel agent. That must have some great stories. You know?
Yeah, it's funny that people that work with rich people usually have the best stories. Like, we did like a club promoter or something, and he had some really good stuff as well.
Yeah, they're like insane, you know?
So what's your plan to maintain contact with your network in the event of a widespread services outage, such as in a natural disaster, or a cyber attack, EMP attack, or maybe just the slow burn of increasing censorship and government spying on your activities online? Well, I'm Civil Defense Engineer, and today we are going to talk about HF radio as a backup comms. Well, what are the other alternatives, though? Maybe you rely on Starlink. Well, that's a great solution, but it has its problems. You know, it's not relying on the regular internet infrastructure. It's kind of a parallel system. And you'd have to take out all the satellites to take it down for a well-coordinated cyber attack. But more importantly, I want you to consider this. As much as Elon Musk talks about free speech and all that, you are still putting all your eggs in one basket if you are relying on Starlink. Unless you own all of the infrastructure from point A to point B, you are subject to somebody else's censorship. And a whimsical man like Elon Musk, he's had an effect on the geopolitics of the world today just by turning on and off access to Starlink. Moreover, just between you and me, my idea of free speech is not the ability to share pictures of waifu cat girls in various states of undress. It's more about forming resistance movements and the freedom to communicate with anybody I choose and talk about whatever we want. So keep that in mind. All right, so what else do we got? Well, there's the ubiquitous Baofeng radio, and this allows for direct comms, but it has limited range because on VHF and UHF bands, you are limited by line of sight, basically. So you can reliably get out to about 2 or 3 miles, I'd say, before you start having spotty connection. Obviously, there's repeaters out there, but repeaters, they're only so helpful. If you have friends that live further than 30 miles away, you might not be able to even reach them with a repeater. And from our group's perspective, we have members dispersed over an entire state, 2 states basically. So there's no one repeater that can reach everybody. I used to think when I first got into amateur radio that repeater networks were like cell networks, that once you tap into them, you can talk to anybody in an entire geographical region, but that's not how they work. It's one repeater that boosts your power and your signal by an elevation advantage. So that's all a repeater does for you. There is stuff like the East Coast Reflector, things like that, that do use internet to relay messages to other repeaters. So I once was listening in on it and heard a guy in like Florida talking to a guy in Ireland. But you're still relying on that internet infrastructure to make that link. Well, what about, if you're a little nerdier, what about mesh-tastic devices? Well, these are useful too, but they are even more limited by range. The nice thing is every node is its own repeater, and they do link, but they have even more limited range. So, I don't know, maybe a mile or two, definitely only that. So you're not going to reliably reach all of your members. Where these really shine is, say you have a mass protest, and there are thousands and thousands of people in one geographic location, all trying to coordinate. Now, if the government doesn't like that, maybe they will be shutting down comms, and even if they don't, comms could be overloaded. Cell networks could be overloaded because of all the influx of people. That's where these really shine. Or if you are all meeting up at a bug-out location, and that's also where these will be really helpful. You can track where people are at. You can communicate via text over phone. But it's not going to reliably reach people that are dispersed over a geographical region, even a city, maybe a neighborhood. Honestly, even in the city where I live, where there are a lot of people using these, we can't reliably have a text conversation with our members because some people might not have their nodes charged up. Some people might not have them turned on, or just doesn't propagate through the mesh network reliably that day. If you want to know more about Mesh-tastic, check out some of my videos on that. I have one where I put it up on a balloon, and that definitely helps, but a balloon is not a very stable platform, so I'm considering using drones next time. I did find lots of uses for drones, herding sheep and whatnot. Okay. That's it. So there really is only one solution, and that is HF radio. And this is a little bit daunting to most people because they don't understand it, and it's expensive to get into, typically. But in this video, I'm going to show you how HF propagation works, show you all the cheapest gear that you need to get into it, and I'll just demystify it for you using as basic language, lay language as possible. I am not an RF engineer. I am a mechanical engineer. So I will be bringing things into lay parlance and dumb person speak as much as possible. This video is not for the ham nerd. This video is for the average prepared citizen that wants to maintain contacts in any situation. So we'll talk about all the gear you'll need, how HF propagation works, and then at the end we'll go over step by step all the nitty-gritty little details you need to know to get set up and be transmitting on HF. So let's go over all the gear that you'll need to get into HF radio. And all told, it should be under 200 bucks, but I'll put the current price of each of the components up on the screen here as I go through it. First and foremost, the beating heart of the whole system is the HF transceiver. Now this is a QRP rig. Now that is a hand brevity code for an HF rig that is low power, under 10 watts. If you get just the true SDX here, it will cost you 123 bucks. You can power it over USB. It only does 5 watts in that configuration. I do recommend getting the external battery pack, which gets you up to 10 watts. And that makes all the difference for making contacts. This is the simplest, cheapest HF rig on the market that I know of. And I think it's going to really help get HF capabilities into the hands of regular folks. Alright, we'll talk about the computer in a second. Now I have my higher power, nice Yaesu rig in here, Yaesu FT891. If you can afford it, go for a higher power HF transceiver. But the next thing you'll need is a bit of coax. And that connects your radio to your antenna. Just make sure your coax cable matches your radio on one end and your antenna on the other end. The main types of connectors are SMA, which are like the little twist-on types with the B-nuts, and they come in a small version and a larger version. And then B and C, like this, which allows just a field expedient quarter turn. And you'll need supplies for an antenna. You can buy one outright, but to do it cheaper, you can make your own. My favorite method is to get some aluminum electric fence wire. Aluminum is a great conductor, not as good as copper, but you know, it's cheaper and it's stronger. You know, that's why they use aluminum for high tension lines. This is a good way to make one that has the banana connectors to attach the wire to, and then the coax connection at the bottom. It has a balun built in, and that helps match the impedance of the antenna to the coax cable. You know, they have to match in order to... So what's your plan to maintain contact?
You gave those separate? Okay. You'll need to probably convert. Printer. Okay. Okay. Look for a file named printer.cfg. Okay. Why would I need to do that? Where are we going now? Alright. Alright. Save as. Printer. Okay. Oh, that ain't gonna work. Okay. Okay. Well, guys, I guess it's the end of the Hume clock. Or else I got a network error. I've restarted my Pi a couple of times. And, this is what I get. This is what they said you'd get if there's an issue. So, I could have an internet problem, but I think this is the end of the ham clock, to be honest. It's been great. It's been swell. And really appreciate everything Elwood did. And it's too bad he's not here. And I think that that's more important than any kind of ham clock, is the fact that a human's life was lost. And I don't know his entire story, but I'm sad that he's not here anymore and that he felt that he had to take his own life, but I think he had late stage cancer or something like that, so I can't say he did the right or wrong thing. I don't know. I just had a friend, used to talk on the radio. He died the other day from cancer, and I don't think it was very fun in the last few weeks for him. And they've got other friends that are dying from cancer as we speak that I don't think will make it to the end of the year, so I totally understand. So, there's some other programs out there. One of the ones that I checked out a while ago, I don't like the open ham clock one that guy Chris is doing. It's just too hard to see the spots on the map. Otherwise, it seems kind of cool. I think there's one called Ham Dash, and then there's ham dashboards. There's a bunch of different ones. If you look around, there's a bunch of different ones. But, you know, we'll be fine. I've been a ham long enough. I didn't used to have this stuff. And when I do FT8, I go and I open PSK Reporter, and I can see what the map looks like anyway. So, oh well. All right, guys. I'll catch you later. Well, guys, I guess it's the end of the ham clock. And yes, I'm aware of the guy in Florida that approached Elwood a few years ago about making money off ham clock and purchased the name hamclock.org. I don't know the guy, but he sounds like a scumbag to me, and there is no way I'm rerouting my traffic to his server that he claims will never be paywalled and will always be for free. Servers don't run for free, guys. People that pay for domain names don't roll for free either. People that want to make money off of Hamclock and other websites don't do this for free. If you think that that guy is going to do it out of the kindness of your heart, then you're just as stupid as the rest of the sheep in this world. And I will not participate in that crap. I don't know what kind of information or marketing that he plans to do or advertisement revenue he plans to do, but I will not partake in it. I am currently compiling Clipper for my Ender 3 printers. And I will use the Raspberry Pi to run Clipper. Does she really hate you that much? Question mark. You're calling it Dadger. Dadger. Really? That doesn't look short enough. Dadgers.
So what's your plan to maintain contact with your network in the event of a widespread services outage, such as in a natural disaster, or a cyber attack, EMP attack, or maybe just the slow burn of increasing censorship and government spying on your activities online? Well, I'm Civil Defense Engineer, and today we are going to talk about HF radio as the backup comms. Well, what are the other alternatives, though? Maybe you rely on Starlink. Well, that's a great solution, but it has its problems. It's not relying on the regular internet infrastructure. It's kind of a parallel system. And you'd have to take out all the satellites to take it down, or a well-coordinated cyber attack. But more importantly, I want you to consider this. As much as Elon Musk talks about free speech and all that, you're still putting all your eggs in one basket if you are relying on Starlink. Unless you own all of the infrastructure from point A to point B, you are subject to somebody else's censorship. And a whimsical man like Elon Musk, he's had an effect on the geopolitics of the world today just by turning on and off access to Starlink. Moreover, just between you and me, my idea of free speech is not the ability to share pictures of waifu cat girls in various states of undress. It's more about forming resistance movements and the freedom to communicate with anybody I choose and talk about whatever we want. So keep that in mind. All right, so what else do we got? Well, there's the ubiquitous Baofeng radio, and this allows for direct comms, but it has limited range, because on VHF and UHF bands, you are limited by line of sight, basically. So you can reliably get out to about 2 or 3 miles, I'd say, before you start having spotty connection. Obviously, there's repeaters out there, but repeaters, they're only so helpful. If you have friends that live further than 30 miles away, you might not be able to even reach them with a repeater. And from our group's perspective, we have members dispersed over an entire state, 2 states basically. So there's no one repeater that can reach everybody. I used to think when I first got into amateur radio that repeater networks were like cell networks, that once you tap into them, you can talk to anybody in an entire geographical region, but that's not how they work. It's one repeater that boosts your power and your signal by an elevation advantage. So that's all a repeater does for you. There is stuff like the East Coast reflector, things like that do use internet to relay messages to other repeaters. So I once was listening in on it and heard a guy in like Florida talking to a guy in Ireland. But you're still relying on that internet infrastructure to make that link. Well, what about, if you're a little nerdier, what about mesh-tastic devices? Well, these are useful too, but they are even more limited by range. The nice thing is every node is its own repeater, and they do link, but they have even more limited range. So, I don't know, maybe a mile or 2, definitely only that. So you're not going to reliably reach all of your members. Where these really shine is, say you have a mass protest and there are thousands and thousands of people in one geographic location all trying to coordinate. Now, if the government doesn't like that, maybe they will be shutting down comms, and even if they don't, comms could be overloaded. Cell networks could be overloaded because of all the influx of people. That's where these really shine. Or if you are all meeting up at a bug out location, and that's also where these will really, really helpful. You can track where people are at. You can communicate via text over phone. But it's not going to reliably reach people that are dispersed over a geographical region, even a city, maybe a neighborhood. Honestly, even in the city where I live, where there are a lot of people using these, we can't reliably have a text conversation with our members because some people might not have their nodes charged up. Some people might not have them turned on, or just doesn't propagate through the mesh network reliably that day. If you want to know more about Mesh-tastic, check out some of my videos on that. I have one where I put it up on a balloon, and that definitely helps, but a balloon is not a very stable platform, so I'm considering using drones next time. I did find lots of uses for drones, herding sheep and whatnot. Okay, that's it. So there really is only one solution, and that is HF radio. And this is a little bit daunting to most people because they don't understand it, and it's expensive to get into, typically. But in this video, I'm going to show you how HF propagation works, show you all the cheapest gear that you need to get into it, and I'll just demystify it for you using as basic language, lay language as possible. I am not an RF engineer. I am a mechanical engineer. So I will be bringing things into lay parlance and dumb person speak as much as possible. This video is not for the ham nerd. This video is for the average prepared citizen that wants to maintain contacts in any situation. So we'll talk about all the gear you'll need, how HF propagation works, and then at the end we'll go over step by step all the nitty-gritty little details you need to know to get set up and be transmitting on HF. So let's go over all the gear that you'll need to get into HF radio. And all told, it should be under 200 bucks, but I'll put the current price of each of the components up on the screen here as I go through it. First and foremost, the beating heart of the whole system is the HF transceiver. Now this is a QRP rig. Now that is a ham brevity code for an HF rig that is low power, under 10 watts. If you get just the true SDX here, it will cost you 123 bucks. You can power it over USB. It only does 5 watts in that configuration. I do recommend getting the external battery pack, which gets you up to 10 watts. And that makes all the difference for making contacts. This is the simplest, cheapest HF rig on the market that I know of. And I think it's going to really help get HF capabilities into the hands of regular folks. All right, we'll talk about the computer in a second. Now I have my higher power, nice Yaesu rig in here, Yaesu FT891. If you can afford it, go for a higher power HF transceiver. But the next thing you'll need is a bit of coax, and that connects your radio to your antenna. Just make sure your coax cable matches your radio on one end and your antenna on the other end. The main types of connectors are SMA, which are like the little twist-on types with the B-nuts, and they come in a small version and a larger version. And then BNC, like this, which allows just a field expedient quarter turn. And you'll need supplies for an antenna. You can buy one outright, but to do it cheaper, you can make your own. My favorite method is to get some aluminum electric fence wire. Aluminum is a great conductor, not as good as copper, but you know, it's cheaper and it's stronger. You know, that's why they use aluminum for high tension lines. This is a good way to make one that has the banana connectors to attach the wire to, and then the coax connection at the bottom. It has a balun built in, and that helps match the impedance of the antenna to the coax cable. You know, they have to match in order to get the most efficient setup. I don't think you need to nerd out on that. A lot of this stuff, the ham nerds will chase maximum efficiency, but in my opinion, better is the enemy of good enough. So let's see what I have set up over here. I have my antenna set up in an inverted V configuration, and it matters how long each leg of the dipole is in order to be resonant. It's based on the frequency you're using. So you might have to have multiple antennas set up if you're using multiple frequencies. Or you can set up like a fan dipole with different legs that are resonant on different frequencies. I'll put the equation for calculating that up here. It should just be 468 divided by the frequency that you're using in megahertz, and that will get you the length in feet. So back over here, I strongly recommend getting into digital modes, and that allows you to use keyboard to keyboard typing on your computer, and great way to connect with people. It also is a weak signal mode, JS8 call, FT8, that kind of thing. We're going to be using JS8 call. It's a weak signal mode, meaning that you can make the connection with a lot worse signal to noise ratio than you normally could on voice. So in order to operate digital modes, you need a device called a digi-rig, and this just talks to the radio by converting your digital signals into audio signals and vice versa. So if you remember that scene from the Transformers where they're in the Hoover Dam and the mic doesn't work and they're like, hey, can you hotwire this computer in order to transmit, you know, blah, blah, blah. That's basically what they're doing.
We're hot. We're live. Where are the mics? Max? This doesn't work without mics.
Glenn, can you hotwire this computer to transmit a tone through the radio?
What good is that?
You can use this to transmit it through that.
Okay, I'll do it.
So you'll need a special cable that matches the radio you're using. They've got a gazillion different digi-rig cables. So this one is currently plugged into my Yaesu, but I've got one for the True SDX as well. You also want to have another bit of cable, just a micro USB that connects to the radio directly. And that's for the control, not for the audio. And lastly, grab a beater computer. You know, you can have one that never connects to the internet if you're worried about any kind of spyware or ComSec related issues. You can also use an Android device, but the Android version of JS8 Call is still in development, so your mileage may vary on that one. So that's all you need for gear. Well, what do you think? That's not much money unless you're factoring in the computer, but and you don't even need the digital modes, but I strongly recommend it because it offers a lot of capabilities that you wouldn't have otherwise, such as relaying messages, a little bit of added ComSec. It's not encrypted, but it's encoded into its own digital protocol. Anybody who's listening who is decoding on JS8 will be able to read your messages in the clear. But it adds a little bit of security by obscurity, but don't count on it. You can't sacrifice your other good ComSec practices. It also allows for relaying of messages. So if you can see that station 2 can reach station 3, and you can reach station 2, but you can't reach station 3 directly, you can actually have station 2 relay a message to station 3, almost like a, not like a repeater, but basically that's what you're doing. So it's pretty powerful. I really recommend you get into it. It takes a bit of trial and error and a steep learning curve, but I'm going to show you all the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of how to get set up after we talk about HF propagation. All right, we're all hooked up. Let's go over all the connections once more. Starting from the antenna, the signal travels down the coax. We've got a adapter to the small SMA that goes into the radio right here. From the radio, we have the digi-rig cables. Mic and key goes to the red one. Audio is the green one. Then there's only a single plug down on this end, which goes into the audio jack. And then there is a USB connection. I've got a USB hub right here. Don't worry about this one. That one's going to my Yaesu radio, not active right now. And then this one goes to my radio, and that will power it on. All right, how does HF propagation work? Well, here is the Earth, okay? And here's your station. There is the ionosphere, and there are multiple layers of the ionosphere. There's the D layer, there's the E layer, and there's the F layer, which is F1 and F2. So you're trying to reach this dude over here. Boop, boop, boop. You can't reach him line of sight like you would with a VHF radio because the curvature of the Earth gets in the way. Now there are 3 types of propagation for HF radio. One actually is ground wave, which propagates along the ground, and it can kind of go around the Earth a little bit, but you're basically limited to the line of sight that we're used to with UHF and VHF. So let's say that's, I don't know, 30 miles. Then we have skywave. That will refract or reflect, either way, off of the ionosphere. And it depends on what band or what the conditions are, which layer it's bouncing off. This D layer here, it absorbs higher frequency, lower wavelength. But it allows the lower frequency, higher wavelength to pass through and get refracted by these higher ionosphere levels. So maybe if we're on 20 meters, maybe we're being refracted by the E layer here. And bada bing, bada boom, we can reach this guy way over here. And maybe this guy is like 800 miles away. I don't know. The interesting thing, though, about HF propagation is there is a skip zone. This is a dead zone where you can't reach anybody in this area because by ground wave it's too far, and by sky wave, just based on the trigonometry, you can't bend it down at that acute of an angle. But there is something called NVIS, Near Vertical Incidence Sky Wave. It's a type of sky wave propagation where the takeoff angle is basically straight up, and then we are refracted back down. So it's higher than, it's within like a 30-degree cone of vertical, and you can hit the skip zone that way. You also don't care about mountains in the way. You could be at the bottom of the Grand Canyon and you're still transmitting just fine. You could probably reach somebody in Las Vegas from the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I don't know if anybody's tried that. You're not going to be reaching the 800-mile away guy because in this case, the trigonometry is only allowing for acute angles. Now, there might be multiple skips. I think that's possible. It can bounce off the ground and then hit the ionosphere again. That's happened. That can happen, but it attenuates the signal dramatically with each bounce. So this is great for our type of comms because all the people we're trying to reach are kind of in this skip zone. They're within our state, you know, they might be within 200 miles of my location. So this is the type of propagation we're going for. But how do we set that up? Well, normally you would want your dipole antenna. Here's the feed point. Let's just say it's perfectly horizontal here. And here's your ground plane. Normally you would want that to be, so for normal skywave, you'll want a height above the ground of at least half of a wavelength. But for NVIS, that should be less than 1/10 wavelength. It should be about 1/10 wavelength. You don't want it too close to the ground or you're not going to be getting very good propagation that way either. But the ground plane is acting kind of like a reflector. So the energy, the RF energy that is propagating downward is reflected back up. That's my understanding anyway. There's probably a more technical way of explaining it. But it's kind of using the ground plane as a directional antenna, forming the beam upwards rather than at a low takeoff angle. A couple of notes on NVIS propagation. The first is that NVIS is a type of propagation, not a type of antenna. And that means that even though you have it set up in a sort of NVIS configuration, like 1/10 wavelength above the ground, you may still be getting a component of your transmission that is propagating regular skywave. And so I've actually been making lots of contacts all over the country, not just in my own like 200-mile radius around me. The other thing is, for those of us that care, NVIS propagation is very difficult to radio direction find because the signal, especially if you're using a QRP transmission under 10 watts, it's a weak signal, but moreover, it's coming from the sky. It's really hard to get a precise bearing on the transmitter location. That's why spy stations historically were able to get away with using these discrete number stations for so long, because not only were they able to get their messages out all the way across the continent sometimes, but they were very difficult, if not impossible, to pinpoint the location of. You also need to know about space weather. Oh my goodness, you can't even predict regular terrestrial weather, and now you're telling me you have to know about space weather? Well, here's the basics of it. The solar flux is what energizes the ionosphere. That's how much solar energy there is passing through a unit area. And it follows an 11-year cycle. If you remember, we are near the solar maximum right now. A couple of years ago, you could see the aurora borealis all the way down in southern states like Alabama, which is very atypical. Now, although increased solar flux gives the ionosphere a boost, it also comes with an increased solar flare activity. And when there are solar flares, it can cause a geomagnetic storm. And when that happens, the ionosphere is way too unstable for HF skywave propagation. Think of it like a reflective pool versus a stormy sea. Now that's not exactly the difference here because it's refraction, not just reflection. But the point is the ionosphere has so much unsteady energy and it just scatters the radio waves, making the noise level way too high for communication. The good news is the smart people have already done all this legwork for you. You don't need to learn all this jargon like K-factor and all that. There are websites that you can go on and look up the current band conditions and it automatically updates. It's not perfect because, again, weatherman is always wrong. Sometimes when a band is showing fair, I've made lots of contacts, and when it's showing good, I haven't had any luck, but it's just a good reference to go off of. Now, this is not an ideal setup in terms of antenna efficiency. However, in terms of practicality and balancing your radio operation with everyday life, this is the perfect solution. I'm up here in my attic and I've got a 40-meter dipole. The coax runs to a closet where I've drilled a hole through the ceiling, run the coax down there. I can sit right at my desk and transmit away to my heart's content. It has pretty good propagation, but it's slightly attenuated by the roof, by the asphalt shingles, by the roofing nails, by the particle board. But I've made contacts all around the country this way on this tiny little antenna, from 10 watts up to about 80 watts. Using the Yaesu transceiver, I can go up to 100 watts, but I typically hover around 80 just cause. Now, while I'm up here, have you heard the tale of the specter of the HOA? Now, before we get into transmitting on HF, I suppose you're wondering, how do I do this legally? Well, to transmit on the amateur radio bands, all you gotta do is study for the test and take it. It costs what? Probably, I don't know, 20 or 30 bucks at most to take it. It's good for 10 years. And the good thing about getting the license is that it gets all the sad hams off your tail, because honestly, the FCC doesn't really care. They never fine you, they never go after you if you're just doodling away on HF, transmitting, blah, blah, blah. They only go after the really bad ones, the ones that are causing harmful interference to official channels. That's what they really care about. But the amateur radio nerds out there, they're the ones that will enforce this. They're the ones that really care. And maybe you don't care about ticking these people off, but honestly, the best thing to do is get the license, because these people can be your allies. They can help you learn the ropes. Yes, they're rough around the edges, but being able to talk to them in the clear over the airwaves is a great way to practice. So I'm not into rag chewing with them, but I'm all about making contacts, testing radio equipment out, and just experimenting. And you can't do that without someone to talk to. So get your license. It's not that hard. Now, to get everything set up right, you have 3 things you need to do. You need to check all your hardware connections, which we already went over, but here is a nice little diagram summing it all up. Second, you need to get all your radio settings correct. And third, we'll need to go over all the software settings in JS8 Call. So let's first take a look at the radio settings. Everything can be accessed through the menu here. So the first thing we want to change is the volume. Don't want it too high or too low. This matters because the audio is how the computer and the radio are communicating. It's not communicating with ones and zeros through this USB. It's communicating with audio through this audio jack, through the digi-rig. So the next thing you need to look at is the mode. So that's 1.2. You can go through the menu with this knob right here, and you want USB. This is not referring to Universal Serial Bus USB. This is referring to upper sideband as opposed to lower sideband. Now usually if you're on 40 meters and you're talking on voice, you want that to be lower sideband, LSB, but for digital modes, at least for JS8 call, it uses upper sideband modulation. For filter bandwidth, you want full, or as full as possible. I think it needs to be at least 3K. I guess I've got it on 4K. For band, we're using 40 meters. I think 40 meters is the most capable do-all band at any time of the day. Now, sometimes 20 meters will be better than 40 meters. Just go and check that website that shows the band conditions during the daytime and the nighttime. But 40 meters is generally fairly capable because it doesn't get absorbed by that D layer of the ionosphere. Next, this is the tuning rate, so when we're not in the menu, this knob controls what frequency we're on, and this tune rate just shows by how much it changes with each click. I keep it at 1 kilohertz. VFO mode, leave it on A. RIT, leave it off. AGC, that's automatic gain control. I would recommend having that on. And that's it. There are other things on this, but you don't need to worry about all of them. I would leave them at the default. So there you have it. Those are the radio settings. Let's move on to the software settings. Okay, so this is the JS8 window. I'll introduce you to the different elements here and then we'll dive into the settings. Down here in this main part on the bottom is the waterfall. And this will show you the messages as they come rolling in. And you won't see a lot right now, and I'll explain why in a second, but when they are here, they appear as lighter green or yellow blobs that show up in between these green horizontal lines. And they have to be in bursts between the horizontal lines because that allows the software to decode it accurately. This means that everybody's JS8 call has to be running on an accurate clock. Therefore, there are two things you need to know about that. Either your computer is connected to the internet and it's getting clock updates through that, or you have another device like a GPS that has an accurate time that your computer can pull from, or there's something called automatic time drift where, over here, timing, automatic time drift, if you can see that your messages are overlapping these lines and they're not being decoded properly, then you can start automatic time drift and then it will adjust your horizontal lines until it decodes something properly. Then it'll have that offset. Up here in the messages window, you will see the decoded messages. And sometimes if it doesn't get the whole thing, you'll see a bunch of ... Here you see somebody's call sign, and I don't know what he said because he has a really low SNR, signal to noise ratio. And why don't I address the elephant in the room right now while I'm talking about it. Here are the current band conditions. For some reason, we're green across the board except for 80 to 40 meters in daytime conditions. And it's currently 2:30 p.m. local, as you can see. So poor propagation on 40 meters currently. Even though there's no geomagnetic storm, there was one yesterday, I believe, which can carry over to today, unfortunately. So I will try again tonight and we'll see if we can actually send some messages. But I'm just trying to get the settings out of the way right now. Look, we decoded somebody. We got him at minus 21 decibels SNR, but he heard whoever this is at minus 0.9 decibels. Now, this yellowish window here, those are your saved messages. So everything that you've sent here, and everything that you've clicked on and saved, see I just clicked that one and it appeared over here, it saves it here. Otherwise they'll disappear after a minute or two. And then on the right, we have all of our saved call signs, and I have recently cleared it because I am not trying to give out all my contacts' call signs. These are ones that I've just picked up on since starting recording. Also, you'll notice I'm using a bogus call sign up here, CDEA1. That's not my real call sign. I'm pretty private about my call sign when it comes to YouTube. A lot of the ham nerds are going to be up in arms in the comments that I'm even using a bogus call sign. I am licensed, guys, but for YouTube, I'm not going to blast my call sign. It has my full name and other personal information that people can find online. So let's go to the settings. You go to File, Settings, and there are 3 tabs you'll need to look at. All these other ones, don't worry about. The General tab. Enter a call sign. Even if you don't want to put your actual call sign, the software will let you use a bogus call sign. And I think that is a win. But in actual operation, I will put my real ham call sign in here because, like I said, other hams you encounter on the airwaves, you won't build any rapport with them if they can't get past the fact that you're using a bogus call sign. So use your real call sign, your real grid, your grid locator here. This is not my real grid, but it's not too far off, I guess. This is your Maidenhead grid, and this is what most ham radio people use instead of like 10-digit GPS coordinates. If you don't know what yours is, there's a easy way to find out. Just type in your zip code or something on a web map, and it'll tell you. And this is important because entering one here will allow you to do heartbeats, and that is a very important functionality of JS8 call we'll talk about after going through the settings. So that's the General tab. On radio, the simplest way to get this to work, at least for the true SDX, is for rig, select none. If you click on this, you'll see that there are a bajillion different radio models in here. ICOMs, Kenwoods, Yaesus, all the big names. And that's because each radio might have its own control protocol or something like that. And I don't want to mess with that, so I'm not doing cat control, I'm doing RTS. RTS stands for request to send, I believe. It is still a digital command using RS-232 control to toggle your radio's PTT. But it's a lot simpler here. Your port, find out which port your radio is on. And if you're not sure, go to Device Manager, unplug your radio, and see which COM port disappears, and then plug it back in. Finally, when you are ready, click Test PTT. And now I will grab my phone and show you that my radio is transmitting. See that T right there? That means transmitting. Usually it says R. So right now I'm just blasting something. I don't know what it's sending, but I'm blasting. I'm holding it wide open. But that threw me for a loop when I was first doing this because I didn't know that you have to go back over here and unclick it. And now you see it's an R on receive. So it's stupid little things like that I gotta show you because I would spend hours beating my head against the wall. Why is it holding the transmit on? It's because you have to unclick Test PTT. I don't know why I didn't think to unclick it. I thought it was just like a brief little thing. Anyway, moving on. The last tab you need to worry about is the audio tab. And remember we have the DigiRig. If you go down here to your taskbar, on audio you'll see a bunch of different things. You'll probably have headphones and speakers and stuff. it'll show up as a USB audio device. And again, if you're not sure, go to your device manager, unplug it, see which one it is. So for input and output, select that on the audio tab. And that's it. Now we are ready to dive in and try using JS8 call. Are we brave? Are we going to try and get a message out on 10 watts with an attic dipole on a day with poor propagation? Let's try it. So what we do here is we go over here and we click heartbeat. Oh, before that, make sure it's enabled because you might not see that button. So go to mode at the top, enable heartbeat networking, and you'll probably also want auto reply with confirmation because it's fun to be able to acknowledge other people's heartbeat requests. Oh, and enable heartbeat acknowledgement, ACK. All right, so when I hit this, you'll see in this text box right here, this is what we're transmitting. And over here, once it's ready, it will start transmitting automatically. And it takes 10 seconds to do it. While we're transmitting, we can't receive anything. So make sure you time it right so you don't miss out on important messages. Are we gonna hear anybody back? Did anybody hear us? This would be awesome if so.
1 minute later.
Well, doesn't look like it. Anyway, we'll try this again in the evening and see if we get any better results. But I hope I've been able to show you the basic functionality of JS8 call. I forgot to mention that you can operate JS8 call on any frequency. Well, any frequency that you have transmission privileges on, I must rush to say. But to have the highest chance of making contact with others on the air, there are standard frequencies for each band, and on 40 meters, that's 7.078 megahertz. When running your own net with your chums, you may want to find another frequency to avoid unwanted attention. For instance, those of you who follow S2 Underground will know that he runs his ghost net on 7.107 megahertz. So here on the screen, you will notice that I had picked up 2 stations, one of which the call sign didn't come through for some reason. You can check the location of a station by going to qrz.com and looking up the call sign. The contact I made just before this clip appears to be located in Ohio, about 400 miles away from me. Not bad for a 10-watt rig and an attic antenna. He heard me at -11 SNR and I heard him at -14. Weak signal modes are where it's at. This also goes to show that NVIS is not a hard and fast thing. My contact that I made on this video was 400 miles away or so. That's a little bit beyond the traditional 200-mile radius that is often quoted with NVIS propagation. That could be either 2 things. One is that there were multiple bounces off the ionosphere. Maybe there were 2 hops. Or the other option is maybe it wasn't an NVIS propagation. Maybe it was a small component of the lower takeoff angle that gets mostly dampened, I guess you could say, by the ground plane, but it still gets out a weak signal. And for JS8 call, that's all it needs. Just to explain a little bit about digital modes, this is what JS8 call actually sounds like. It's actually audio, and if you have an audio file of the encoded JS8 sound, you can actually play it straight into a microphone on your computer and decode it on the JS8 call software. So it's a really cool ability. It's all based on sound. And as an added Easter egg, here is another digital message using another protocol, and see if you can figure out what it is. Let me know in the comments below. So here are your action items for today. Consider what you're going to do to meet up with your group or to communicate with them if comms go down, if cell networks, internet infrastructure goes down, gets clamped down, gets